Welcome back to another episode of the Way Forward podcast. This episode I had on my dear friend, Dr. Kelly Brogan, to discuss masculine and feminine dynamics, saying no, and the freedom movement, and several other things. We went off on a lot of tangents during this episode. It was really an incredible, down-to-earth, candid conversation. And I always enjoy talking with Kelly because she's become such a good friend of mine and, has played an instrumental part in my family's healing journey, and have so much respect for her authenticity. And, that's something that's really, really hugely important to me. So this conversation was great. I'm sure you will enjoy it. I did. So, not much more to say about it. Let's go ahead and get into the episode. So you've been talking a lot about reclamation lately, and what do you actually mean by that? What is reclamation? How have you reclaimed a piece of yourself that was missing before, or that was covered up?
This is a very good question, and one that I haven't thought to ask in so many years. I was just at this retreat and like BDSM retreat, and I was talking to this guy, and he's like, "What do you do?" I still don't know how to answer that question. I don't know if you know how to answer that question for yourself, but
no clue.
Yeah, right. And I was like, oh, well, I support people in like personal reclamation. He's like, what does that mean? I was like, wow, okay, let me start at the basics. And essentially, there isn't a one-liner, but if there were one, I think it would be this process of discovering and developing intimacy with the parts of you that have been hidden from your own awareness. And I do wonder if that's actually maybe that is why, we incarnated to have this like embodied adventure, right? So that we could delight in the remembrance, the sort of awakening to the discovery of what was already there, right? Like, so there's something about the sort of pretending to be asleep and then waking up that is really delightful for us. And I have enough experience at this point developing a relationship with the parts of myself I really wish weren't there. The parts of myself, like, let's say, my inner villain, especially when you get into spirituality and the new age. And, I did like kundalini yoga training and all this stuff. It's very easy to invest in the higher ground, right? So I'm not somebody who hates. I'm not somebody who wants to harm those, who have transgressed my boundaries, right? I'm not that kind of person. I'm not a villain, right? I'm a good person. A good person doesn't, wish harm on their ex, kind of a thing. And as long as I pretend that that's not there, then I will wage war on that which is outside of me, right? So in the activism space, this is very low-hanging fruit, right? So I'll find the villain on the outside and I will, devote my life to warring against that energy. Meanwhile, it's really this inner war that is being projected, on the outside. So that's how I think of it. And it's an ongoing process. I mean, I'm still probably like on a daily, weekly basis, encountering dimensions of myself that I am uncomfortable with. My first podcast, we were just talking about podcasts, that I recorded was 25 ways that I've become that which I judged. So that's kind of how I think about it. It's like, I judge it, and then I recognize that it was always in me. And there I am. And this part that I had relegated behind a shame wall almost always comes like bearing gifts that were untapped because I was, really invested in keeping it sequestered. But they're mostly creative gifts, I find, and it's an expansive experience. You feel bigger and also more comfortable in your own skin, because that's really the worst. That existential anxiety of just like, oh my God, how do I be a human? I don't know. Everything is hard. Relationships and eating and bodying and all of it is like so confusing. And over time, it just becomes a little bit more like, here I am. Here I am doing my weird version of human. Here I am.
And what does that look like for you though, specifically? Like, what are some things, let's say in the last 3 years, some pieces of yourself, you talk about this like shame wall that we all put up, that you've reclaimed?
I think the biggest one, and I have actually found that this is like quite templated, like it's a stereotyped phenomenon, post-divorce, which is this like, sexual reclamation journey, right? And you could sort of diminish it into some sort of midlife crisis or whatever, and that's fine. But there's really
I'm sure some people think that on the outside, probably.
Oh, for sure. Oh,
yeah.
I've gotten all the things.
Yeah.
And that's actually been part of the reclamation practice. Actually, I have found after taking like a year and a half or so hiatus off of social media during pandemic times, like really personally, like looking at it, caring about it, investing in it, whatever. Plus I got deplatformed, whatever. I got back in the comments, right? And I started reading the comments. And, the thing is that if you are bothered by what somebody is saying, and you could say, well, they don't understand me, and, they don't know what they're talking about, or, you could dismiss it. But if it bothers you, it's because there's a part of you that agrees with them.
Yes.
That's what I've found.
Yeah.
And often that part is holding the belief that says, if you are ever what they say you are, you will lose something very valuable to yourself, right? Which is like love, is a sense of identity, approval, connection, belonging, all these things, right? So it's, social media and the anonymous projection field of that space has been actually one of the deeper spiritual practices I've engaged in. So, over this past, I would say, year and a half or so, although I started working with an erotic coach, Whitney, about 2 years ago, because I just started to have the feeling like there's like more to my erotic experience in this lifetime. And I was thinking mostly sexually, like there's more that I haven't tapped into, and I feel inhibited, like I feel like I want to feel freer.
You haven't felt the depth of experience regarding that specific thing.
That was possible, and I was I've had a lot of great sex in my life, like it wasn't like a deficiency. It was this sort of mysterious invitation, to like come here. And I thought like, oh, it must be like tantra, or like there must be like, deeper energetic sex I could have or whatever. And around the same time became very interested in polarity dynamics. So, like masculine, feminine, yin yang, what is it to come into your lane so that you can really create like powerful complementarity. And, I started working with her, and the first 6 months of what we did was shadow work. Wow. And I was like, wait, I thought we were going to talk about squirting and like multiple orgasms. Like, what's happening here? This is not what I'm paying you for. And it was very powerful for me because I recognized the connection between the shadow and our sexual energy. And I started to explore the work of Alexander Lowen, who's a psychiatrist who wrote a book called Fear of Life. And I was trained in a rather Freudian psychoanalytic, also very psychopharmaceutical model at NYU Bellevue. And a lot of what I had learned there, I've sort of threw out like the baby with the bathwater when I walked away from the pharmaceutical model itself in psychiatry as a guild. And there's a lot in there, that explains one potential framework of how it is that we get hit against our own vital force, right? So people think of Eros and they think it's like, all about this like wild sex. Eros, I think of as the fundamental like sensuality of our animating energy, which comes online very early in infancy, right? It's a part of our embodied experience, and arguably it is the driving force of our humanity. So when we, as a breastfeeding infant, like bite our mom's nipple, right? And she's like, ouch, don't hurt mommy, don't do that, right? And her energy is reprimanding, right? even then, even in that moment, let alone the infinite moments that are to come, where we're jumping on the couch and we're told to stop doing that, where we're crying and we're told to stop doing that, where, we're caught masturbating and we're shamed into oblivion about it, right? We begin to develop this sense that my impulses are bad. My native desires are problematic. This is who we are, right?
Yeah.
If we can't trust our impulses, right, then we cannot fundamentally trust ourselves. And you and I know, then you're rendered very easy prey for a predatorial system that would have you convinced that you are not the expert on you. Then we're warehoused in the school system where we have to raise our hand to go pee-pee, and we're told when we can eat, and then we go home and our mom says you better finish your broccoli and you only get ice cream as a reward if you clean your room, and these things are not even natively connected. And we have all of this distortion around our biological impulses, our sexual impulses, and our creative impulses. And we develop this distrust that then gets mirrored all throughout our lives, where we are navigating without any sense of personal agency or authority. We're deferring to outside powers, and even in the spiritual realms, like this is like the tarot reading, astrologer, consulting, it's like, we don't know what it is that we can trust within ourselves. And so then we get obsessed with like, who's trustworthy on the outside, right? And betrayal and deception. I've actually started watching like a good amount of TV. I've told you this.
Yeah, you told me that.
I'm obsessed with like these Viking shows, right? But then I started watching this like other show, that has nothing to do with Vikings and warfare and whatever. And it's about the same stuff, right? So somehow all of these shows that we're being programmed with voluntarily are about deception and betrayal.
Why do you find that so fascinating then, if it's like we're trying to dissolve the fear of that on the exterior, right? In the external?
Because I think that's that's why it's fun to like engage in mainstream stuff a little bit. Like I don't watch the news. I haven't in, I don't even know, 15 years, but I am enjoying like, normie land in the TV world, because I can see, oh, wow, I think what they want me to be enculturated around is the belief that betrayal and deception are random and they're inevitable. So if you experience it, whether you're in, interacting in like a Viking trade deal, or you're like, British royalty and you're falling in love with a pauper or whatever, like if you experience betrayal or deception in the realms of like love and power dynamics and whatever, it's just kind of how the world is. Right. And so you kind of better get good at not trusting people and getting your own back. Okay. That makes sense.
Yep.
However, it's non-random. And I think that the truth is that there is no such thing as betrayal or deception on the outside that is not already occurring on the inside.
It's essentially like, without getting too new agey here, but it's like you are quite literally attracting what is inside of you. That point,
it's a mirror. Like it's a mirror, and there's co-creation, right? So like I have a girlfriend, I'm very interested in the topic of infidelity, as it relates to this construct we're examining, right? So I have a girlfriend who is experiencing, infidelity on her partner's part, okay, after like many, 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 many years of marriage. And she's very evolved, like, very, I would say, spiritually mature individual. And I am watching how easy it is. It's almost irresistible to take the bait of making this person, this man, her partner, bad and wrong for what he did. And actually to experience like, oh my God, are you even the person I thought you were, right?
Yeah,
like you're a bad person and I thought you were a good person. And so it's like very easy in that situation of betrayal to take the bait of focusing your energy and investing your energy in establishing the proof that this person is bad and wrong. But what, I'm like a really annoying friend to have when it comes to this kind of stuff, because first of all, like, she doesn't need him to be bad and wrong in order to make her choices, right? So if this means for her that the relationship is over, it's irrelevant, whether he is a good or bad person, right? So exercising the power of choice without needing to make someone bad and wrong, to me, is sovereignty. That's like literally the definition of sovereignty. But moreover, what could she have done? How could she take responsibility for the fact that this happened to her, in quotes? And what I have observed in man-woman relating, which I've made a study of, having, had two marriages.
I want to talk about that more deeply in a minute too.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll just say briefly, having had two marriages that did not work out, I am very curious about like my role, right? Because I could be like, oh, I just was with whatever.
Did you find yourself in that state at any point in time too, where you were in the very, yeah.
Oh, of course. Yeah. It's irresistible. I literally think it is irresistible. So all you can do is bring awareness, like, to the fact that there is an experience of victimhood, right? Yeah. There is the pain. There is the how dare he. There is the no fair. Yes, that is there, right? But how can you play host or hostess to all of the stories and all of the parts? Because what I've found in man-woman relating is that the moment a woman loses respect for her man, and this could happen in many different ways and for many different reasons. And it's very personal to her, right? So it could be because he's demonstrated that he doesn't have emotional self-possession and he's like too reactive and hysterical. And she sees that within the first month of dating. It could be because he's not taking care of himself, right? It could be because he's not on path with his mission. It could be for all sorts of reasons. But the moment that she loses respect for like real, not in like an incident, but she actually loses respect for him as a man, she is no longer able to give him what he requires in that dynamic. And he will source that elsewhere. Honestly, as he should, because we need to meet our needs. That's how they work. Right. And so you either meet them covertly and, indirectly, or you recognize, wow, this situation's not meeting my needs. Here's what I need, woman. And can you give it to me? Or vice versa, woman to man. And so, when I brought this to her, she humbly was able to recognize that happened some time ago. Right. So if she's not meeting his needs and he's not meeting her needs, this is a blameless example of futility.
Wow.
And that's why I've become really interested in blameless futility. How can we recognize dynamics, situations where we are, as like I always say, and you've heard me say it a million times, like trying to buy eggs from the hardware store. We are insisting that something be available that's not available. That futility does not have to involve blame or judgment. So, I like really went off on a tangent because what you asked me,
I don't even remember what I asked anymore, and that's okay. That's good. But I want to pull on this thread a little bit more. Like I know this is more on the personal level, but how does this relate to people that are like in what we call the freedom movement, right? Where like they're needing someone to blame. They're in this like rageful, vengeful state. Maybe they had a kid who was vaccine injured, which is a terrible thing, of course, right? But how do we wrestle with this as it applies to being in the so-called freedom movement?
Yes. This is something I am very passionate about because as I have done the deeper work of understanding the places where I've been storing shame. And what I never finished saying was that a lot of the work I've done in the past year and a half has been around my own sexuality and integrating my sexuality into my greater persona, and rather than compartmentalizing it like literally only into the bedroom for my secret experience. And understanding that my sexuality is connected to my creativity, is connected to my vital force, is connected to all of these dimensions of myself that bear the gifts of my animated humanity, right? So as I've done that work, I have found a lot of ways that I was invested in being perceived as a good person, of course, right? We all are. But my brand of being a good person was to be responsible and professional, right? And to also be
you look at like any videos of you from 5-6 years ago, like what you wear versus what you wear now, like
versus my braless leopard crop top. Yeah, you're lucky I put on clothes for you. I know, and this is very common, especially I think with women. Although maybe that's not true. You could tell me. We have certain lanes and compartments, right? Like you can be an exotic dancer or a stripper, and you can do certain things. You can be a doctor or a lawyer, and you can do certain things. But I call it archetype switching. To archetype switch is not allowed, right? So you got to stay in your lane so that we don't have to confront the cognitive dissonance of how it is that a mother or a professional could also be somebody who enjoys, exotic dancing or whatever it is, like, experiencing, her body in a certain way, maybe even for, public eyes. And what I found is like, what would that have to do with activism? Like those seem really unrelated. Was that as I was doing this work of understanding where I was keeping myself imprisoned, no one was doing it. I cannot blame my partners, right? Like I was doing this to me. And I actually chose partners who reflected to me that energy of judgment, right? So that's why I'm saying it's common post-divorce, because you're like, there's like a little part of you that's like, wait, can I come out now? Oh, nobody's like telling me no, right? I don't have that person to constrain and constrict me anymore. So what's available here, right? I also began to see all of the ways that my activism was really fueled by this, in my case, fear of men, right? So my sexuality was suppressed because I was afraid of men, and my activism was driven by that fear. It was a directly compensatory mechanism. And obviously this does not translate to you or others or whatever, but what I have found is that unless you can interrogate really honestly and uncomfortably the unseen motives of your sense that you know how the world should be, and that you are so sure what is right or wrong for anyone but you, for the child across the street, like literally even your own child, which, trust me, like this is not, work I have done in my own personal life with my own children and their health or whatever, but I'm saying like, this is something to explore. It helps to expose how it is that what you are saying is driven by an altruistic impulse may actually be a self-preservation. It may actually be, a self-protection and defense mechanism that keeps you from visiting with the ways that you are having your needs met through, quote unquote, helping others. And, my pre-existing understanding of the Karpman triangle, right? So the villain, the victim, and the rescuer really helped me to see, okay, activists are the rescuers, right? That's where our victim consciousness hides. And if what we're so worried about is power over, if what we're so worried about is authoritarian, totalitarian grids that are going to be placed on us like jail cells, then we might benefit from better understanding these kinds of power dynamics, right? And we might understand, what is disempowerment? I think of disempowerment as victim consciousness, right? So the illusion that you do not have power is victim consciousness. The sense that there are no choices, that you have to ... right? The sense that it's random and you're just subjected to forces that are bigger than you, right? All of that we know is not actually the truth. And so victim consciousness is suffering. It hurts, and it should, because that hurt is how, it's like with a piece of glass in your foot. Good thing it hurts, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't know to take it out, right? And so it would serve us to examine the anatomy of these power dynamics and to see where sometimes we can hide this consciousness as activists. And we specifically imagine that I'll speak for myself. I imagined that without my help, like my specific help, writing blogs, writing books, right, doing infinite like interviews, that people would be in trouble. So they need Kelly. Well, isn't that convenient that I get to be really needed and important, right? That's fine. Seems relatively benign and maybe mutually beneficial. However, what is reified, unfortunately, is the fact that these people need my help, right? That they can't do it on their own. So what ends up happening is their powerlessness is actually reified by my role as a savior.
Wow.
And the truth is, no rescuers ever actually want their, those they're saving to be rescued, because then they'd be out of job.
Yeah, then that's such a good
they'd
point.
be out of job. And
another thing that comes up with that though too is then what that creates down the line is that you are now subject to your constituents, so to speak, that you are then subject to the likings, the desires, the wantings, what they are, quote unquote, requiring. And I would argue, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, what the world needs is not like more of Kelly or insert any other so-called activist in place of Kelly doing X, Y, and Z for her people. It's Kelly being Kelly being the fullest expression of Kelly. That's what the world needs.
100%. 100%. And that's why I think, I love and resonate with you and, the people that we call our collegial intimates, is because that's what we've decided is all we can do, right? Like I've hung out with you. You're the same you right now, that you are, behind the scenes.
Yep.
And I don't think I was aware that I was not. That's the trouble. It's like, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so until you're ready to begin to be, sort of like access authenticity, you're just not ready. So I'm not insinuating that there's like, that activism is bad and everyone should stop. And like, I'm just observing that I was absolutely propagating and perpetuating the very resonant vibration, if we could call it that I was suggesting was the problem.
Yeah.
So I was in victim consciousness, pretending to be this like, virtuous, savior in ways that's really what was going on. And imagining myself empowered to do so specifically, and then feeling so good, every time. Well, actually, if I'm honest about it, I didn't actually dwell much on the feeling good. I didn't have like much of a capacity. Like I would get letters and stuff, people's, I don't know. And I couldn't really register it. I was so focused on, I call it the erotic caress of the enemy. Like I was obsessed with the enemy. This is what happens. Like when you get into this realm, it's like all you can think about is like, what is the enemy doing? That is a more intimate relationship than you probably have with your lover.
Oh my God. I've said the exact same thing, because I see so many people so focused on what they are doing out there. And like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend we shouldn't be aware of it on some level, because then you end up, injecting your kids with 7 to 9 shots in one sitting every 3 months. And like, that's completely unnecessary and potentially very harmful. But the point is, the people who are so focused out there on what they are doing, I guarantee in almost every case, there's some element of them where they don't want to be here with themselves 100%. Because they feel shame.
Yeah. This is also in family dynamics. This is the martyr, right? So this is the parent who is so obsessed and focused on their children, who become narcissistic extensions of their own, insufficient sense of self. Mm-hmm. That they imagine they're doing all this good for their child. And what is felt by the child is that they're being like used, right? As like a vessel. And that obsession is just so that they don't have to be with themselves and focus on themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what, I'm sure you see this too. When I started to work over a decade ago in the vaccine advocacy world, like, my former partner and I ran this sort of like big list serve, and we'd be in all these discussions. And I was like, wow, these people are really unpleasant to interact with. These activists, right? They're like really angry and like don't have social graces.
And not fun to be around.
Yeah, they're not, definitely not fun. Do not want to party with them on a Friday. No. And what I started to observe was like how many of us, myself included, had like shrapnel strewn personal lives, just like shit shows of personal lives, imagining that we're in a position to create the new future, right? Mm-hmm. Like imagining that we are the people who should be like empowered to tell the world how it is meant to be. And so that focus on everyone else's business. And in my case, my children, first of all, I was very much a workaholic at the time. And I had the karmic fortune, I guess, of having my parents' support. So I was largely absent, from my children's early lives, let alone, basically like, melting down my entire family structure as I like pursued another relationship while I was married that it turned out to be my second marriage. Like it was just a shit show.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was so concerned about the anonymous child, right? Like you said, that child who's going to get like, 7 to 10, jabs at one visit or whatever. I was so concerned with that child, saving that anonymous victim, right? Like the hungry person, in Africa, the Iranian woman, the sort of child heading to the first wellness visit. I was so concerned, as are other, activists, is my point. Whatever, pick your pet topic.
Yep.
You're concerned with the anonymous victim. And that allows you to fundamentally ignore the victims, if you will, the dynamics in your own
My
space.
God.
And your own, first of all, that you are perpetrating as the villain in your own space, but then also your own victim, your own inner victim that has not experienced your attention and love fundamentally, because we tell ourselves, if I go there, it will be so big, it'll consume me, right? Like if I actually spend time with my own personal inner victim, the one holding like the grief, the one holding like the immense hurt, the one holding the anger, right? From my cardinal wounds of my childhood. That is what we don't want intimacy with. And it's much safer to have it with an imaginary person, right? Yeah. And the truth is, like, Alec, it is not your business whether that child gets 7 vaccines.
Yeah.
It's like,
and that's a tough one for people to hear. That is
Trust
so
me,
tough.
for me too, it still is. And, I have literally ended friendships with women who have chosen to vaccinate their children. So I'm not like speaking from a holier than that place. I just am aware that I am in a space of playing out dynamics that I'm unwilling to explore within myself through other children.
Yeah.
Right. And I even see this, in my dynamics with my own kids. Like I'll give one little example. I could give infinite ones because I've been making a study of my mothering, for some time now, imagining like I've done all this work to end these cycles in my mother line and all this stuff. Right. And, I have observed that in the health freedom space, we have a lot to work on when it comes to parenting. Right. And here's why. Because if the origin of trauma and personal like fragmentation of self is that we are enculturated in our family of origin and in society around what is good and what is bad, and that what is good gets love and what is bad gets neglect or punishment, right? Then we might imagine as evolving beings that in the health freedom space, we're not doing that, right? We're not doing that. There was a book that was very indicting called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And one of the things that the author says is that emotionally immature parents will focus on their children's physical well-being to the neglect of their emotional security. And I remember when I first read that, I thought back to literally forcing my daughter when she was probably like 3 to take this like cod liver oil, like supplement concoction that was arguably like disgusting before we would go somewhere. I don't remember where we're going, but I remember she
like
was
anytime
crying.
you leave the house, like I don't
even know. It's just some stupid power move, like some, or it's not stupid because
like will be healthy. We will be holistically healthy.
Exactly. Exactly. And to this day, I have debates, struggles, with my 14-year-old who is interested in making her own choices about personal care products, about food, about relationships, etc. And she has made it clear to me that like she sees that I will withdraw love if she makes the wrong choice.
Wow.
So we're traveling. We're in Mexico last week.
I was in Mexico too. So
I know. I saw that. I was in Tulum with them.
You were in Tulum as well?
Yeah.
What the heck? That's crazy. Okay.
I know. There were like 100 people from Miami there too. It's like Disneyland. It's ridiculous.
This
is my
true.
first experience.
Literally 2 out of every 3 people there are white. So yeah.
No. It was like $400 for breakfast too. So I don't know. But I've never traveled internationally on my own with the kids. And I had this belief that like I couldn't handle it or I couldn't do it. So it was like a low hanging fruit for me to try it there. So I did. So, okay. So we're out to dinner. And I have been like really rigid about like gluten, dairy free in my household because of my, whatever dietary journey, like their whole lives. And as my daughter turned 13, her individuation process very clearly began,
Mm.
right? And so I have expressed to her, that I approve that she is like making her own choices around her food. I'm going to obviously still stock my own home with what I want there, but she's empowered and whatever. Okay. So we're out to dinner and she wants to order this pasta dish, right? And it sounds really cheesy that we're ordering pasta in Mexico, but actually this place is really good. So whatever. She wants to order this pasta dish and they have a gluten-free version, but it's going to take 45 minutes for the gluten-free version because they're probably not going to like microwave it or I don't even know what. And the regular glutinous version is like available normally. So I feel her energy and I feel her like perusing the menu for like an alternative option, even though she wants that pasta just to appease me.
Wow.
Like I literally can feel the fakery that's happening where she's pretending she's going to not get the gluten version because nobody wants to wait 45 minutes for her gluten-free pasta. And so she's going to maybe order something else instead. And so I just turned to her and I was like, listen, order whatever you want. And she ordered the glutinous pasta. I loved it, right? And like felt great. But that's the thing. When we set up the dynamic where our kids get love from us only if they do the healthy thing, how is that better than whatever the hell we were raised with, which was all flavors of unconditional love about like probably not health related things. So we're just translating that same energy. And that's what I've become really obsessed with exploring is like, how is what we are calling spiritually empowered, right? Or maybe psycho-spiritually, physio-spiritually empowered, literally the same exact vibe as that which we are imagining we are protecting ourselves from and exiting.
There's so many threads that I want to pull on here, and I think I'm just going to ramble for a second. I think it'll be okay. So it's like what you just referred to is that we are trying to change these parenting dynamics that we are subject to, or even like us being, quote, subject to the government and the pharmaceutical industry and everything else. And it's not about the physical, it's a mental paradigm first. And ironically, that is what I've come to discover, and what you've come to discover too, is that is the fundamental essence of what leads to disease as well. It's not a shift in the physical. It's not, I'm going to eat a Whole30 or paleo diet. Thank you for that though, Kelly. We did that for the first like 5-6 years or whatever. But but the point is, it's all about the mental, emotional, metaphysical components first. And the question that I have though, and I've been questioning this myself, is it's like, what you're talking about is inviting people, not only inviting people, encouraging people to make their own decisions and explore for themselves. But how do we balance that out with the understanding that we are fed, quote unquote, wrong information or incorrect information about things? They have covered things up. Like, you explore these things in your own series on your own show, right? Or on Vital Life Project. How do we balance that out? Like these conspiracies, these hidden truths, but then also allowing people to make their own decisions. Like what is the play there? Hopefully that was clear. I don't even know if that was a clear
absolutely.
question.
No, it's totally clear. And I think you can only workshop yourself, right? So when we get distracted with, and again, when this is compelling to you, like do whatever the hell you want to do, obviously, at whatever phase of your life you're in, fine. But for me, I'll say, like, I got to a place where I recognized my preoccupation with what they're doing to us was fundamentally a distraction for the ways in which I needed to deal with shit in my life, in my relationship, right? In my parenting that I did not want to deal with. And so what I have interested myself in is how can I feel for when I'm being lied to, right? Because again, I watch these like Vikings, right? In this fictional world.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, it's so interesting. They get the most powerful protagonists, like you can witness in these actors, like that they are feeling the deception, even though it makes so much sense what the other person is saying. And it's like all sort of checks out, but they feel it. Okay. How do you open up that intuitive channel? How do you begin to use your body as an instrument for bullshit detection? Well, I believe in an order of operations, right? And that's why, I think absent, the lifestyle choice reclamation, the diet, the detox, these basic chopping wood, carrying water things, it's really hard to shift your nervous system out of fight, flight, freeze, fawn patterns. And to be able to reclaim, what in the psychobiological world is called neuroception, right? Which means that you can scan your environment and accurately assess for danger. Yeah. Right. So you're not going to look at the pile of laundry on the chair in your room and think there is a murderer there to come get you. You're going to see it's a fucking pile of laundry. Right. That cannot happen when your nervous system. Tom Cowan always tells me not to use the phrase nervous system. Okay, your system.
We get it.
I don't need nervous.
Isn't it crazy how much we have to think about what we say now with respect to that? If I talk about DNA
in my ear, I know.
Same.
Cells. I can't use the word cells, genes, DNA. Okay, so your system. You reclaim that so that you have sobriety in your perception, right? And you're not involving these projections. So I think that we get better and better at not only perceiving what is right and wrong, for us on the outside, what is safe and dangerous, but that we also, in that more self-possessed space, we are able to assess what our choices are. So you don't need to you don't need to take the bait. You don't need to get into this kinky dynamic with the enemy in order to know what your choices are. Right? You want to go to the doctor or you don't want to go to the doctor. You want to put on a mask or not. You have choices. And even when you think you don't have choices, you still have a choice about how to narrate what's happening such that you can start to open up to new opportunities and to see choices that you imagined weren't there. Because the truth is, until you know you have a choice, you actually don't, right? You actually don't, right? So that's what you're saying. What happens when you're just being piled on with all of these lies? Well, you're a match to that, right? When I was medicating, pregnant and breastfeeding women, I was not a bad person. And now I'm a good person. I was the same person who was a match to that consciousness, who was a match to that system. So I don't believe in victims. I think that, victim is is part of the illusion, right? Victim consciousness, I call it the only human pathology. So if I choose, that's my choice to not believe in that. If I choose to not believe in that, then there is always meaning. There is always order in every single micro system that involves a person and their lived experience. But I'm not going to concern myself with that. And that sounds like I'm a selfish, uncaring bitch. That's fine. People think that. That's cool. I have thought that about myself. So it's they can only punish me as much as I agree. And I believe it. And I have found that as I withdraw my obsession with what it is that they're doing to us, I find that I've been doing those same things to myself, lying to myself, chronically lying to myself, right? Gaslighting myself, abusively interacting with myself through internal dialogue. And that I've also been, really intolerant of my own experience, right? So I've devalued and dehumanized myself. And then I'm all up in arms that I'm being dehumanized by the man or whatever. I mean, come on. I'm saying this is come on, Kelly, let's just focus at home. And when at home feels okay, meaning at home in myself, then let's see how much I care. Honestly, at this point, you can see from my public work, I can't be, it's just not relevant, right? It's what happened with the medical system in general. It became not relevant to my life at a certain point. And then I didn't feel as compelled to write all the blogs and make sure people knew, about all these adverse effects. I don't want to argue about it. It's not interesting to me, right? If it works for you, cool. If it doesn't, here's some resources. Here's what's interesting to me now about my own experience and the ways that I have self-betrayed, self-abandoned, and self-deceived. Because until I get to a place where I am able to be radically honest with myself, what I need, what doesn't work for me. And this is these little examples on the daily. Okay, so the other day I went kayaking with my daughters, right? And so there's not the right number of people. And there's a central casting, kayaking dude who's in charge, right? And so he's a totally not gross, fine dude, right?
Yeah.
So he he's going to be in a boat like with someone.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh no, I'm cool. Like I'm cool on my own. Right. So he ends up going with some other woman and my girls go in the boat together, the two of them, and I'm in a boat kayak by myself. Okay. I almost died.
What
almost
happened?
died. It was so fucking hard. I almost didn't make it the 2 hours. It was so windy. And I think of myself as like relatively physically fit. I was not like up to the task. And I was like, wow, why did I not want that guy to be in my boat? Here's why. Because I didn't want to feel responsible for his entertainment. And I didn't want to have to maintain conversation with him and like make sure that he felt okay, like sharing the boat with me and that everything felt normal and cool the whole time. That seemed exhausting to me. So I would just rather be by myself. Okay. The truth is that I had a need for support that I probably intuitively sensed, and I ignored that need and I acted in violation of myself. Okay. These are the little ways that we every day know what we need. We don't honor it, right? Our yeses, our nos, our boundaries, our desires. And as long as we are in that self-violation, it is the most childlike expression to imagine that there is any entity on the outside that owes you that sort of regard. Because it's not true. We are adults. Wow. And if there are any children for you to take care of, you know, they should have come through your body. Right? So like the rest of the children, you know, like if somebody asks you for help, great. But otherwise it's not your business. So this is how I've come to really focus my attention on developing the integrity of my own self-relating before I imagine that my relationship on the outside to any projected authority figures is supposed to look a certain way.
Wow. I want to pull on the thread of parenting, I think, but I also, we don't have a ton of time. So let me think about this for a second. In that situation, kayaking, do you think there is like an element of you that didn't want to be in that situation because you didn't trust that man to be able to do a certain job? Maybe.
Well, it's that perhaps, but it's really that I don't trust myself and my no, right? So I was at this BDSM retreat recently. It was one of the most excruciating experiences of my life.
What was it like? Like, what was it? Can you describe that?
That's a whole other story.
That's probably a whole podcast in and of itself.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I mean, it was great. It was great and life-changing. Actually, it was a life-changing experience ultimately, but it was like, I was like crying the first night, you know, with Ayla, with my girlfriend, like in the room. I was like, I can't do this. I need to go home. And why? Why was I crying? Right. So I was crying because we were being partnered as women who identified as sexual submissives with men who identified as sexual dominants, but the men were not trained, right? So it sort of was like going to a salsa partner class and you're supposed to be led by the man, except the man doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. So that model, like that didn't really work. And so I ended up being like partnered with people, you know, for these like very G-rated exercises, but like, and I had this experience of being like in incapable hands. And it was like really uncomfortable for me, right? So what I recognized that night was, okay, if I am comfortable with my no, which they encourage, this whole community is founded on consent. Okay. No one is being forced to do anything. And even in the moment, there are safe words. It's literally built to make people who feel unsafe in dynamics and relationships and with their sexuality feel safe. That's the whole point of BDSM, literally. Wow. According to me.
And people on the outside would have so many misconceptions about what that actually is then.
Well, it's also in the DSM, you know, it's also in the DSM as a paraphilia.
Of course it is.
Of course it is, right? So anyway, what I recognized was that if I were comfortable with my no, there's no problem here. There's nothing to be anxious about. There's no issue. But most of us, absent anger, don't know how to express our boundary, our no, right? So once I got to the point, which was like the next day or so, where I said, you know what, I'm actually going to only partner with women for the rest of the week. It was fine. I mean, I like didn't get off.
Yeah.
So it was like that fine. But I guess it was fine because I learned a lot of techniques and I explored a lot of the psychological aspects of it and whatever. But the anxiety was because I didn't know how to express my boundary. So the same with that man. Like, let's say if he was chitty chatting more than I wanted to or whatever, all I have to do is like somehow energetically or otherwise express like, hey, I want to like enjoy the silence of nature or whatever might have been the case. It's not a problem, right? But I'm really good at my no when you've transgressed me.
Yeah,
like,
when you've pissed me off, when you've pushed the buttons a little bit, but when it's like, oh, this is a nice guy who, you know, or a nice girl or a nice someone who is being so kind to me, it's so hard for me to say no.
It's hard. And
I find that same thing in myself too.
It's the caretaker. Yeah. And it's actually how you respect someone to make sure that they know what works for you and doesn't work for you. Mm-hmm. What works for you works for them. What doesn't work for you, it actually doesn't work for them. Mm-hmm. And whatever you think you're giving them from your empty cup, right? Like is actually not what you imagine it to be. So that's where I've really come down on the whole, you know, sort of like kindness, you know, philanthropy, altruism, like all of that. Until we have a very deep relationship to our own needs, you are not in a position to imagine, you know, that you can give anyone anything that you don't want to give them. And normally how this is smoked out, and I teach this to my kids, is like, if you do something for someone, right? Like, okay, like my eldest is always asking my youngest to like serve her, right? Like she's like, go get me this or go do that or whatever. And I always tell my youngest, I'm like, listen, you can do that for her. But if she doesn't appreciate it, are you going to be upset? Right? Because gratitude is often the covert exchange where we are expecting gratitude, right, as part of the exchange. And when it's not given, right? So I used to like go over, let's say, time in my psychiatric appointments with patients, right? And I'd be like, oh yeah, it's fine. Like, but then once in a while I'd have a patient who like then complained that they didn't get enough attention from me, let's say, or whatever. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? I gave you all those extra minutes in the session. Okay. I was giving those because I actually needed the patient to appreciate that. And once they didn't, I wouldn't have given it.
Which goes back to like, you are truly doing this for yourself.
For yourself. 100% of things we do are for ourselves and the meeting of our needs. And you can smoke out anything that you imagine you're doing for someone else if the covert intentions are exposed, right? And almost always those are to be appreciated, you know, and seen for the goodness, you know, that you've brought to the table. And what if somebody can't offer you that, right? Then what? Would you still give it? Well, probably not. And that means there was an exchange that they didn't have the opportunity to consent to because you didn't say, hey, listen, I'm going to offer this to you. And like, I really need you to appreciate it. Like nobody said that, right? So I found it really helpful in my own personal life to work with this concept of the offer or the ask, right? Like sometimes when we think we're offering something, we're really secretly asking for something. Wow. And how you know is like you're attached to their response. If you're offering something, it doesn't matter whether they do it or don't do it, like it or don't like it. You're offering it. It's a largesse, right? But if you're actually covertly asking for something, but you just didn't have the inner fortitude to own that that's actually something you want, so you hit it in an offer, right? If you're asking for something, then make sure it's known that you're asking for it. Right? Like, you know, like this. I mean, I have so many examples.
Well, I mean, what this comes down to is literally just be authentic. And that's just so hard for people. I feel like that's so hard for so many people.
Well, it's hard for me still. And it's hard because it's like the last time I remember smoking out like that, I was asking for something instead of offering it. And I was pretending to offer it. I was really embarrassed, right? Like it's like, oh, I don't want anyone to know this thing, right? Like nobody look at me, right? So that shame is like so much for the system to handle until you begin to get practice with it. And it's literally just holding the sensation, right? Like, you know, my best girlfriend, Tara, the other day called me out on something. I don't think she'd care that I'm mentioning this because it's about me.
I also love Tara, so this is great.
Yes, I know. It's like such a small little community here. So, I was like telling her how I thought she felt about something that she was telling me, right? She's like, Kelly, can you not tell me like how I feel as if you know better than I do? And when she called me out on, that's called gaslighting, by the way, that I was doing to her, right? And so when she called me out on it, I mean, I've been friends with this woman since I was 11. Okay, so we have a long history, and she holds a mirror to me all the time, and that's part of the incredible like beauty of our relationship. Even after all these years, when she said that, I felt that reflex of like wanting to convince her that she was wrong about what she just said, right? And that I was right, right? And I also was able to recognize the sensation of like cringe, like an intense internal twist of like, oh my God, I don't like this. I don't like that she said this, right? Like that's how our like parts talk. It's like monosyllabic, like this bad, right? And then because I recognized all this, I could just be with the sensation for like 20 seconds and then leave her a message and say, you know what, I want to work on this. Thank you for like pointing this out. And like next time I do this, like just please let me know. And I want to know about it. Sometimes why this is hard is that if you're in a certain dynamic, the person will pile on. And that really is tough. And they'll be like, yeah, you always do this. Like, God, it's so annoying or whatever. But in other, over time, as you start to relate to people who are, more in this sort of field, I guess, it's just like, there's more love available, right? Like there's even more love available. Like I found with my girls, like I'll give another example because I could talk about parenting all day long. It's like, my daughter recently expressed, confusion about like the end of my recent divorce, let's say. And I've like, taken advantage of opportunities to be like, here's, one narrative about like what might've happened and nobody's fault. And here's why and blah, blah, blah. And this is also really hard for me, like all the things, right? But she's like really sophisticated, creature, this gal, right? So it's like, she gets relationships. She is like literally in a healthier relationship than anyone I know. And she's 14. So she gets dynamics. And she was like expressing confusion about it or whatever. And I was like, oh, well, let me know if I can like answer any questions at this point to like help with that confusion. And she's like, honestly, mama, like not to be uncompassionate, but I don't care. And isn't that the fucking truth? Did you care about your mom's version of the story, your dad's version of the story? I don't care. I cared about my version as a kid, right? So I was like, wow, okay, cool. And I was like, stuff it, Kelly. Like your narrative, your defensive, whatever, nobody cares, okay? And so I didn't say anything. And I was like, okay, cool. Validated her experience. And when we walked out, she like, of the restaurant, she like took my hand. And I was like, this has happened multiple times where like because I can now hold at this point in my system, like what it is for her to experience me as bad and wrong and not come to my own defense, which is essentially abandoning my own post, right? Abandoning my own feeling states so I could fix it on the outside rather than acknowledge that what my feeling states inside want is actually my presence and attention. That's called reparenting, right? So like, as I come to this experience, the dividends are like immediate. They're immediate. Like when you own it, like my girlfriend, the message she left me back was like so much love and adulation for like the fact that I owned that. Right. Like, I mean, it's not always immediate perhaps, but over time, like it becomes predictably so because you start to like clean up the dynamics and the people around you are like, oh, this person is not manipulating me anymore, right? Like this person is not like meeting their needs covertly anymore. Like this is a safe dynamic, right? So this is the level of like work I have focused on. I've chosen to focus on in many ways to the exclusion of focusing on like what's so wrong on the outside. Because at least in my case, that was really a distraction.
Ironically, like, again, I think we could the proverbial we of all of the freedom movement, whatever, which I don't subscribe to anymore in any way. But we that are resonating with this show could do the work to heal society by literally just doing everything that you shared on this episode. For real.
It's holofractal. Like you clean up your own situation and That's your contribution. That's like literally your contribution. And that's also how you can engage wise action, right action. You cannot, if you're in this, it's like being on psychedelics or something and not knowing you're dosed. It's like you cannot perceive what is in front of you if you're intoxicated by your own traumas and dramas. Like you literally can't. So don't think that you're in a position to help anyone. You don't even know what's in front of you. Like you literally can't even perceive with accuracy, and that's part of the game. So that's fine that's how it's played. It's just that I'm interested in sobriety at this point. Like I'm interested in in really connecting to my inner acumen, right? Like how can I be a sharpshooter, right? Like how can I be like a wise witch so that I walk around, I'm like, okay, I feel what you're about, right? Like I'm going to go over here instead. And I don't need to be in these old dramas of being betrayed and disappointed and resentful and getting my kicks off of that. I'm done fueling my life, and my vital force, from those surrogate hits. And I'm interested in, what it is to see clearly, make choices, and then engage in the unknown of what can come, through those choices.
Last question. Do you find yourself to be feeling more still, more presence inside yourself with this, new and improved version of you?
Yes. I think when I look back, because I've been, and I know this is a topic that interests you too, I'm not so sure that there's such a thing as a spiritual meritocracy where I'm actually doing better now than I was 15 years ago. I look back at my McDonald's eating, pill pushing, birth control taking self, who was had never spoken a word about her childhood trauma, was in all sorts of relationships where, nobody even knew who the hell I was, had no idea what I needed. I look back at that girl and I'm like, sometimes, am I really different? I just put out a workshop called Calm Body, Clear Mind. And it involved, I decided not to update these videos that I recorded in 17 or 18. And I look like baby Kelly. Okay. It's like you said, so funny and so different. And I'm my face is different. My expressions are
you are I think you posted recently a clip from you on the Joe Rogan Experience. And I was like, dude, this looks like two different people. It's around
that time. But then I'm also I don't know, what actually is different? What really is, am I happier? No, I wouldn't say I am. I'm not a happy person, yet, or maybe I never will be. I don't know. So what is different, And what I found is it's literally anxiety. It's existential, sense of something is wrong. Okay. I lived with that white noise of holding up the mask tightly and hoping nobody can see it, vigilantly arranging all the things, right? Living in stress physiology, right? I was addicted to stress. There was so much a part of how I moved through the world that I had literally no capacity to be with myself. I didn't even know what that meant. And so what I think has happened over these years is, like you said, it's sort of slowly dropping into my own skin and just sort of getting to this place where I can spend a few minutes with myself here and there. And I would say that the culmination of that work was probably when I did this water fast, over the summer that Kaufman inspired. And, it was 9 days with myself with no podcasts and books and chitty chats with my friends and, TV and all the things to distract me from myself. And that was when I really recognized wow, my entire life, I have been running from myself.
Wow.
Literally every single thing, my degrees, my books, my friendships, all of it has been fundamentally motivated. I recognized with my activism motivated by a fear of men, this was the thrust of my life has been to not be with myself because I have been conditioned around myself as fundamentally bad, right? And so why would I want to be near that? Like, it's bad, it's untrustworthy, it's shameful, right? Like there's nothing to see there, and it feels like horrible, right? So like I really met at that point during my fast, like the part of me that doesn't want to be here.
Wow.
You know, and that's an important part to have a relationship to. You know, that in my private practice, like I worked with many hundreds of women who were actively suicidal, and I never flinched and I never sent anyone to an emergency room. And that's how I learned that developing intimacy with the part of you that does not want to be here is to understand that that part has a longing beneath it. Right. And that longing beneath the protective impulse that says, enough is enough. I don't like this. Get me out of here. Right. The longing, the tenderness beneath that is the love of life. Right. So it's like, how do you choose life? And when we think we're like so afraid of dying, but I've found like we're actually really, really afraid of living, and we don't have the capacity for it. Right. Like those of us who've touched pleasure or bliss or these expansive states, like we can hold it for like 20 seconds, right? Before we start thinking, right?
Yeah.
Minding, mentaling, you know, all the things.
Especially people like you or I who are more analytical leaning.
Right.
So, yeah.
It's a well-honed defensive strategy to like jump up into your mind. It's called dissociation, right? Like that's called dissociating when you cannot attend simply to the experience, the positive experience. So, right, like as I've like been so focused on like resolving all of these negative experiences and traumas and all this stuff, like I found like, wow, I have like very low ceiling for pleasure in my life. Like, you know, I can like walk across my yard and like feel the breeze, perfect temperature in Miami, and like, you know, feel the like sun caressing me. And I can sit with that for like maybe 4 or 5 seconds, like actually fully attend to it, you know, maybe 10 before I'm like, okay, I got to go do something.
Wow.
You know, right? And like, what else am I here for if not to feel those things, right? Like, what are we actually doing here? What do we come here for? Those are bigger questions than we have time for, probably.
Yeah, all good. This was awesome. This is so great. We'll have you back on again for a part 2 of you and I just rambling on. And
that's good. I'm good in doses. I'm good in doses. So
Thank you, Kelly. This is great.
Such a pleasure. Love you, brother.
Love you too.